This is our friend Michael. Michael has the comparative text response task coming up, where he is required to compare the ideas in these two books. But the only thing that he is comparing right now are the prices of Gucci shirts. So let's talk about how to actually prepare for this task. Hey everyone, so this video is going to focus on how to prepare for the comparative text response. And this SAC is worth the most amount of marks, 60. And it's also close to the final exams, which means that it's important to choose the correct way to prepare, because not only is it going to save time for you during the SAC, but it's also going to make your exam revision a lot easier. So to help you with this, I'm going to shed light on what exactly I did to prepare for my first comparative essay. So first, I know a lot of people joke about this, but it is important to read your actual text or watch the film. And as you are doing this, or after, I like to take a set of notes. This way, when it comes to essay writing, I don't have to go back and watch through the entire film or look through my entire book. I can just look at one set of notes that has everything that I need to know. And this is how I approach my note-taking process. So feel free to just take what's useful. So first, I like to make sure that I'm understanding what I'm reading about, which is why I go to one of those online summary guides for your text. So you can just search up name of text or film, summary, and analysis. And hopefully this should take you to some helpful websites. And I'm just going to use LitCharts as an example because I found this the most useful for me. Then I would find the chapter summaries, and for each chapter, I would look first over the summary just to check my understanding. And I usually do this as I read each chapter, but you can do it after you've read the entire book if you want. But what I focused on was the quotes and analysis, because this was already good essay material. And then I used the analysis here as a starting point for my notes. So I took what was useful and disregarded what wasn't. And then of course I added in my own ideas after this. And this is how I set up my actual notes. So on a Word document or in your notebook, I set up a table like this. And the two texts that I did were the longest memory and the 7 stages of grieving. But you'll be able to understand what I'm doing even if you're not doing these two texts. So first I list down each chapter or scene. And then I have 3 columns, one for quotes. So for example, let's just use the quote that they give you on this online resource. It's a bit cut off, but the full quote reads, "A large ice block is suspended by 7 ropes." Next is analysis. So what does this quote mean? And we can use the online guide to offer one perspective. So let's have a look at that and put it in our own words. So let's just say, the ice block is symbolic of Indigenous communities, and the 7 ropes correlates with the 7 stages of grieving. Cool. And then another important part of analysis is it's good to mention why the quote has been used. And here, a very good verb to use is the word highlights. So verbs like this force you to analyze. So they're really valuable when you're trying to analyze rather than summarize a particular idea. So for example, this highlights that Indigenous communities are overwhelmed by grief. That is how we basically analyze a quote. And then in the final column, I make some extra notes if needed. So for example, I could talk about themes or structural devices, etc. So in this case, I talk about themes, which is power and oppression. And if we just zoom out for a bit, you can see that the exact structure we use is the same as when we're writing an essay. We're basically picking a quote, analyzing it, and then using things like themes to determine where it fits into the bigger picture. And if you've seen my video on text response, you will know that this is exactly like our how, what, why structure, which is the building block of all our essays. So to summarize, essentially we are structuring our notes. So it's very similar to the essay structure, and this allows us to transition seamlessly to essay writing when the time comes. So after I've done the first row, then I continue to look for other quotes and repeat these 3 things. And then you just continue on with the next chapter all the way to the end of the book. And you want to do this for both texts. And this might sound like a lot, but it's not something that you have to finish in one day. This, for me, was something that I did across several weeks. So take your time with this, since it's quite a valuable resource. And I personally wasn't the type of person who could come up with a lot of new ideas just by reading a book. So I had to look at websites, research, and form this table. And only then could I start to form more sophisticated opinions and views about the topic. So hopefully this helps those who were in a similar position to me. So far, we have a table containing all the key quotes and analysis for both of our texts. And the next part is to begin comparing. And for this, we need to build another table. But before you roll your eyes, this one is going to be much shorter. And just so you understand where this fits into the overall scheme of things, jumping ahead to our final comparative essay, each paragraph is going to be based off one broad theme, and how this is similar or different between the two texts. So for example, in my text, one important theme was the theme of power, and this ended up being one of my body paragraphs. And I talked about how the first text portrayed power, and how this was different and similar to how the second text did it. So for our next table, we are going to pick a few common themes and big ideas. And you could probably already guess, but I like to first look at some online sources just by searching text 1 and text 2 comparison, and go through a couple websites and see what common themes they come up with. And as with all these resources, they are just like a springboard. So take what's useful and discard what you don't think is that important. And for example, for some of the themes that you see here, I actually added some of my own, and I also merged some of them together. So for example, power and oppression, those two were kind of similar for me, so I just combined those two into one common theme. Now for each theme, we can do something like this. So let's just use power and oppression as the example. So you can see we have a table with two columns, text 1 and text 2. So underneath text 1, in each row, we are going to provide one example, so quote plus analysis, and this needs to support the theme. And this is why we made that summary table above, because we can go back now and just pick and choose which quote plus analysis fits this overall theme. So the theme of power and oppression in this case. So just to give you an example, for the first text, I talk about physical violence, because this is related to the idea of power. And I say, the oppressors abuse their power by exploiting the whip that eats flesh, which highlights their control over those more physically vulnerable, and therefore the dominance of master over slave. So that is one example for the first text. Now you want to compare or contrast that with an idea from the second text. So in this case, I also talk about physical power in the second text. So I say, similar to the violent oppressors in text 1, the imperialists were also able to silence any physical or psychological resistance through the power of a single wave of a stick, which just means using a gun in this case. And this highlights the invasion of Indigenous Australia. And then in the row below this, you can see I have an example of how these two texts are different. So it's always good to have a mix of both, compare and contrast. And this is what I did for every single theme. For each row, I pick one example from text 1 and compare or contrast that with another example in text 2. And I felt that this sets you up really well for the essay writing phase. And just note, apart from themes, you can also compare and contrast structural devices, so the actual structure of the two texts, literary techniques, symbols, etc. So basically anything that you feel like it's important to compare and contrast, you can. It's just that themes is quite broad, and it's usually what you can focus each paragraph on. So that's basically how I set up my notes, and I'll show you now how this links with essay writing. So first I get an essay topic and plan out what each body paragraph is going to be about. Then I look over what themes and ideas I'm going to talk about for each paragraph. And then I go back to my table and find quotes and analysis that fit under these themes and add them in like this. So you can see when I'm approaching essay writing, I first make one of these detailed skeleton plans. This way, it saves you a lot of time thinking of new ideas when you're actually in the writing phase. So that is how I took notes and prepared for my comparative text response. And in next week's video, I'm going to focus on what to exactly write for each section of this essay. But that is it. Hope that was helpful. And if you want to support me, a somewhat small YouTuber, then I would really appreciate you hitting that subscribe button, and take care.